Hi folks, and welcome to Not Just Business. This is your host, Derek Peed, and I'm privileged to have today a very special guest, co-founder and owner and CEO of the Ispani Group, Prince Nwadeyi. Hi Prince, welcome.
Hi Derek, thank you so much for having me.
I see you've been in the news quite often recently as one of the up-and-coming entrepreneurs, and you've won several awards. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us about your journey so far. How did you decide that you want to be an entrepreneur, and then what happened?
It's a very interesting journey. It really all started when I was sitting in a marketing lecture that was being given by Professor Simpson from the Unilever Institute. He was talking about the informal sector in South Africa, and he spoke about how the informal sector was sitting at about 600 billion rand in economic activity. This was about 2015. And the challenge that existed for a lot of big brands and businesses and corporates that are looking at the space was the fact that they had a lack of data that effectively would give them the opportunity to unlock the value that sat in that space. Followed on by the fact that I was equally super passionate about trying to solve the unemployment problem in the country. We saw it as an opportunity to either create jobs for unemployed youth, to collect data in that particular space. And that data obviously would then feed back into corporates and whatnot. I think the pivotal moment for me and my co-founder, so when we can't figure things out, we pray.
Yeah, okay.
So literally what happened was, it was one evening after we had dinner in our digs in Rondebosch at the time, and we were talking about all the things that are happening in the country. Zuma was still in power. There was all of these things that are happening, and we said, how on earth's name are we going to be able to fix things? As young people, how are we going to be able to contribute? So we're just like, hell, let's just pray. So literally after praying, we had the same idea, which was very weird. So we both had a mini sort of, I think when I pray, I see pictures. So we had a mini vision where I saw a young person carrying a mobile phone, being able to collect data via an app, and that fed into a system that aggregated that data and showed it to a corporate in real time. And they were able to make decisions on that particular market. And both me and my co-founder at the time, Tando, saw this to be a really interesting opportunity, but we were fresh out of our savings and money because we had spent most of it on our deposit for the actual place we were staying at. So just how are we going to raise the initial funding to start the journey? So funny enough, I tend to find out myself in interesting spaces. Somehow I got randomly invited to a tea party at the then British ambassador's house, Dame Judith McGregor at the time. Out of that meeting led to a meeting where one of our clients in the energy space, they were a large battery manufacturer. They wanted to do a feasibility study on the South African market, and they needed people to de-risk that market for them from a research perspective. And we subsequently got that business, and we used that money to become the underlying seed funding to actually start with building the tech and stuff. So that's how our journey actually initially started.
So what is it that you do?
So effectively, what we've done at Ispani is that we've built a platform that enables us to collect data in the most rural context on the continent effectively. And corporates able to come onto our platform and deploy a survey or a campaign. That hits the smartphone of an unemployed youth through either of the NGOs that we've partnered with. Currently, we're working with NASPERS on their NASPERS Labs program to empower 3,500 young people over the next 5 years. And those young people then are able to collect data via their mobile phones on behalf of these brands and businesses all in real time, and the system aggregates that data, geolocates each and every single one of them, and then enables the corporate to get the access to this information to then be able to make decisions on the particular opportunities that they're trying to explore within those markets. We subsequently then consult on that particular data. So more often than not, a lot of the data that's come out of that in the financial services space either helps with assisting corporates rethink certain products or services that they're trying to position within markets, and within the FMCG space helps them to understand the underlying motivations of their clients to purchase their particular products in this specific instance, while all at the same time creating empowerment for these young people. And then on top of that, now where we are is that we're adding what we call micro entrepreneurial pieces to the platform where young people can sell airtime, electricity and data. But then very soon they'll also be able to start doing direct sales for online companies who have stock like Takealot and whatnot, and drive electronics into those rural communities where they're based.
How many of these people do you employ in these previously disadvantaged areas or townships?
So currently right now in our business, we have an internal network of about 120 agents on the ground that we're working with. And then what we've then done with those agents is that we've used them to map out spaza stores, which are informal market retail trading environments. And of those, we've got about 15,034 on our database.
15,034, about.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not 15,035 by now.
No.
We've been speaking.
Probably bigger, but the numbers that I'm very clear on is 15,034 to be specific.
So that's quite a lot per person running around out there.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's obviously something that's been done over time. And then part of the strategy of our business at the core is to be relationship heavy and infrastructure light.
So would you describe yourself as a social entrepreneur?
I think in many ways, yes. At the same time, I think one of the big things that people, when we talk about social entrepreneurship, is to think that you can't be a capitalist with a conscience. I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. I consider myself a capitalist with a conscience. I do think that there's a lot of good that capitalism can do, or at least a thinking around it and how we can use it for social good. So in that context, I would consider myself as a social entrepreneur.
Okay.
Just worried about what the socialists will think after that.
How long ago did you start, by the way?
So we started in 2015, but we started at that time as SBS Research. Initially, we were doing a lot of market research work for our client then, which was the energy business, and then also the University of Cape Town, assisting them in a lot of the papers they were trying to push out. So we did a number of papers on how TV shows influence criminal behavior in the informal sector, brand switching behavior in the informal sector. And then in 2017, we then formed Ispani Group. And then under Ispani Group, what we also then established was the financial services focusing arm of our business, which we called Ispani Insure. This was in 2018. That's where we are right now.
This is a question I ask of most entrepreneurs, but I mean, you're a pretty smart guy, you're well educated, you present well, you speak well. You probably got a very good job with a corporate with less stress and less risk. What were the deciding factors that made you go the entrepreneurship route rather than the corporate route? And who did you have to persuade in the process?
I think for me, I had a lot of great opportunities, correct, both in varsity and post-varsity, even though I'm still going back now for masters. I had the opportunity to work for, obviously, our large consulting companies. The biggest thing that made me say no to those particular opportunities was, for me, entrepreneurship was more of a calling than something that I felt that I just had to do for the fun of it, but it was something I really felt that we could do and a lot of good through. I'm always focused on trying to take some form of responsibility for my surroundings, and I didn't feel that a corporate environment would be able to facilitate that sort of freedom. I think in terms of who I had to convince, was a big part was my parents. So I come from a very conservative Nigerian Christian family, and I'm the only one who fresh out of varsity went to start an entrepreneurship journey, so to say. I wouldn't say so much more convincing, but my parents were more of, listen, if you go down this route, you're going to have to figure it out yourself. Don't expect us to fund this thing for you. So a lot of that was, I wouldn't say it was shocking, but it was also like, okay, hectic. My parents actually are like, go figure it out, but we're not going to back you, but just make sure you don't flop.
I probably had the same kind of experience being a white South African. There's a perception that everybody was very privileged. I grew up in actually a very poor household with a father who jumped from job to job and probably drank too much in his younger days. And my mother was super, super conservative. You know, the thing you needed to do as soon as you needed to go and work for the government or the railways or somewhere where the job for life mentality was big in their lives, you know, because that's not something she was used to. So I was an entrepreneur trapped in a corporate household. But anyway, that's a long story. So other than your parents, do you have spouse, partner, children?
I have a girlfriend, and then I have a sister. So my older sister also started off in corporate. Her name's Lovelyn. She worked in financial services, then jumped into the telecom space, and then now is running her own independent consulting business. focused on racial
So
literacy.
she understands entrepreneurship, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. She really does. I think it's been a very interesting journey for her because it's been, I think now it's about post 18 months in the journey full on. So in terms of my immediate family, it's myself, it's my sister and my two parents. And then my cousin moved from Nigeria to South Africa recently to study. And then I have my lovely girlfriend as well.
Okay. So tell me, in your journey so far, what have been what I call the highlights, the lowlights, and the no-lights? Those highlights are obviously the good things, the lowlights, the disappointments, and the no-lights, is things that you wanted to do but didn't quite get around to.
So I think in the context of our particular entrepreneurial journey, I'll start with the lowlights and go to the highlights. I think on the lowlight side, I think there was a lot. I think for me specifically, it was around when we started that, a lot of it was in the initial stages. So in the initial stages, one of the biggest challenges for us was that we invested a lot of money with the wrong firms or trying to build our technology at times. And that cost us hundreds of thousands. And you'd get the piece of technology and it wouldn't be working. And we weren't really so clued up on what was the right processes around how technology should be built because we come from economics and finance backgrounds.
Yeah.
So there was a huge learning curve in that particular regard. And it's always painful when you lose money. To be quite honest, it's always painful when you lose money. But I think the beautiful thing about that, there's this whole notion of school fees. So it's a learning process and you've got to lose money sometimes to make money. So I think there was a lot of learning from that particular perspective. I think it also built a different kind of mindset inside of the team in terms of due diligence and actually making sure that at least one of us know at least 80% knowledge-wise about a particular area before we venture off into it or we necessarily embark on a task. So not just trusting consultants or whoever to just know what to do, but to actually do our learnings on what the right processes are before we go into developing tech. I think being a non-technical founder has been a very difficult thing. That's been the biggest
A
lesson.
non-technical founder of a sort of semi-tech company.
Effectively. So that was a huge learning curve for me. And I think it cost us a bit of money. I think the highlights of the business, people might not necessarily consider this a highlight, but I think for me it was a highlight because I remember, once again, it's in the formative years of our business. I think there was a time when we were so broke, Tando. It's a funny story. So we were so broke, my business partner and I literally had no money. And we then were like, okay, we've run out of food in the house. Our rent is due at the end of the month. What the hell are we going to do?
So those are quite dire straits.
Very, very much dire straits. And I knew that even if I called my parents, they were not going to send me any money because they're like, listen, we told you. And I didn't want to call my sister as well because I was trying to be macho in this particular regard. So Ntanda said to me, Prince, take my card and go to FNB. I have a feeling that I might have some money there. Please check. He was too scared to check himself. So I went to the ATM and I punched in the PIN and we found 150 Rand. Those were tears of joy that we shed that day. And the real thing I think there was the fact that we were out of money, not because we didn't have business that was coming in, but payments were delayed by big corporates. So that put us in a very interesting position. But thankfully, a week down the line, the money did come in. But during that period, I think one of the things that we learned was that we learned so much about ourselves in terms of how we deal with adversity and how we deal with challenge and how we became so creative and resourceful with the little that we had. So I don't necessarily consider all the startup competitions and all of those things as the highs and of our business per se. What I really consider the highs of our business is our capacity to traverse through adversity and to still stick to our values and to still do the right thing at the end of the day.
You mentioned corporates being slow payers. I find that over many entrepreneurs that I've mentored, their biggest problem is getting paid by corporates. Not getting paid at all, but getting paid within a reasonable time. You know, that they've got salaries to pay. It's literally living from hand to mouth in some cases. And corporates all preach entrepreneurship and how they're in favor of it and how they support it. But those practices. So if you're a corporate listening, you happen to be a corporate person in charge of paying entrepreneurs, just do it. Don't come up with all kinds of excuses. So I've got my little plug in there for entrepreneurs. So, with the investors in your business, and at what stage did they come along?
I think for us, we haven't raised any capital necessarily from outside investors.
Where did you get the 100,000 or so that you lost?
That came from client work.
Okay.
So that's why it was even more painful, because it was our money.
Yeah.
It wasn't someone else's. So that came from client work that we had done. I think what we've been blessed enough is that we've been blessed enough to get a lot of decent grants. A number of corporates have been quite benevolent to us, but I think it's also been as a both God's grace and also just doing decent work. So we've received funding both from Rand Merchant Bank. We've got money that came through as well from Diageo. The Bertha Foundation's equally supported our business as well in terms of grant funding, so that's been super valuable.
So, what does grant funding mean? It means you don't have to pay it back.
Technically,
Are there any conditions attached to that?
in certain instances, there are conditions. So sometimes corporates will require first right of refusal for future rounds of investment. In other instances, there'd be certain social targets that you'd have to achieve. There'd be obviously the right sort of governance structures and reporting that we'd have to put in place specifically as to where the money goes. So in the case of Bertha, for example, one of the critical things is that the money, we didn't get it in cash. You'd have to invoice for it, and they'll pay the supplier directly for the technology, whatever the case may be that you're spending the money
fair
on.
enough.
We have, however, been approached by investors in this particular regard. And I think at the core of our business, we haven't wanted to initially raise capital. We are taking an approach of saying it's not that capital is a bad thing, but it's not something that we think we require at this particular point in time to grow. We're trying to be as nimble as possible in our approach, but investing as much of the money that we do make and are generating back into the business to build value and to move as fast as possible. At which point we feel that external capital can help us catalyze the business faster. That's when we'd necessarily go for raising outside funding.
I know you guys lived pretty frugally, and you probably still do. You don't have fancy cars, you don't have fancy houses. And there's a lesson there for entrepreneurs. Don't spend the money before you've even got it. I think there's a tendency for people to try to show their success visually to their friends and families. And you guys have been pretty disciplined, so congratulations on that. So you don't know when you need your next round of funding? Not yet. It's not on the horizon.
Not necessarily. I think right now we have enough money to, I think, achieve our objectives for the next year. However, we are a tad bit more ambitious, so we've got our eyes on some big grant money as well. Once again, no external investors in this particular instance, but the right sort of development institutions who we're currently talking to who really buy into our vision in this particular instance.
What advice would you give entrepreneurs who are just starting out now? Where can they get help?
My advice is that when you're starting out, first and foremost, I think the place where you can actually get help is in your immediate community. So start with your trusted associates. So your friends, your family, anyone that you know that has some form of initial business experience, always taking into consideration that you're going to have a filter, because everyone speaks from the context of their own perspective and experience. And then the second thing, I think for us, where we've been immensely blessed, is that we've had a lot of senior executives in our broader network who we've been able to tap on for advice and guidance in particular areas to think about certain things differently. And that's given us the opportunity to, I think, miss certain pitfalls that ordinarily startups without that kind of guidance and advice would be able to fall into. So I think the principle that we've built in our business is build relationships and add value into those relationships. So that's the first piece of advice. The second advice is never ever do a deal that compromises your values. Money is not everything. I remember quite recently, we decided as a business that we don't want to promote or sell any alcohol products as a value in the business because of the impact that we know that does have on informal market communities. We will help them in terms of reducing the impact that they have on those communities, but never to try promote or sell or give them data to understand these markets better for the sake of their products. And recently we got approached with a 20 million rand deal. And I was just like, Lord Jesus, this is a check out of poverty. But then when I got back to the business and I told the team about the opportunity, the first question that was asked was, what are our values? And I said, our values are not to do deals that are in this sort of form. then the answer was that then go back and say no thank you, or pass. A very difficult thing to do, but a very important thing to do, to say this is who we are, and our capacity to say no is what's going to actually protect the longevity of our business and who we are. Because if we start compromising today, who knows where else compromise can come from in other areas in terms of our value system and the culture we try to develop across the board.
That's really refreshing to hear. Even some of the big consulting companies have got themselves into trouble because one or two people went off the beaten track.
Yeah.
Were saying things like, well, I have my principles, but if you don't like them, I can change them. And unfortunately, that's sad but true. So congratulations. I know it's very difficult to turn down 20 million for the sake of principles, but well done there. What do you think are the traits of a successful entrepreneur?
I think the traits of a successful entrepreneur is someone who knows themselves. I think one of the big things that successful entrepreneurs have been able to do is to grow into themselves, as opposed to only just being able to manage good teams, provide strategy and advice and innovation. My perspective is that before you're able to know others, you must first know thyself. And having a mastery over your own self, firstly, is the number one thing. And a lot of the effective executives that I've seen have been individuals who have been, and entrepreneurs at least, have been individuals who intimately understand themselves, understand what they stand for, understand what it is that they are after, and over and above that, create an enabling environment for other people and people inside of their team to be able to reach their highest potentials as individuals.
You have a girlfriend and parents and sister, and you obviously work hard.
Yeah.
How do you balance it all?
The truth of the matter is that I don't really believe in that notion of balance, to be quite honest. I think it's very elusive and difficult to achieve. What I do believe is in the principle of investing, and that is to be intentional. So when I am with my mom or my dad over a phone call, by Skype, I'm fully present in that particular moment. When I'm with my sister, I'm fully present. When I'm with my girlfriend, I'm fully present. So I believe in being present in moments and trying to cut off all forms of distraction. Am I entirely perfect in that particular arena in terms of what quote unquote might be called balance and the typical sense of the word? I wouldn't say so. More recently, even for me, the doctor had to tell me, Prince, you're working too hard. So I'm being more intentional about rest, and I'm being more intentional about exercise. Every morning I'm running, something I didn't do over the last couple of years. So it's all of these sorts of changes that one has to bring into their lives to be more intentional and being more present, and once again growing into yourself in this particular instance. But a lot of successful people that I've met and I've spoken to have told me that there's no such thing as balance. And increasingly I'm realizing that if you want to really do great things, it's going to be difficult to balance. Something is going to be traded in for something else. But it's more about how you prioritize the trade-off and what you value in that instance.
That is an important point to make, that when you are busy, say, with your girlfriend or with your parents, you're fully present. A lot of people aren't fully present.
Yeah.
Believe me, as a coach, I can tell you, I saw a young lady get onto the plane the other day, and she had a laptop open in one hand, and she had a cell phone pressed between her shoulder and her ear, and carrying the ubiquitous cup of coffee. I don't know where they, I don't know how they allowed her on the plane with this cup of coffee. And I thought, do you know how ridiculous you look?
Oh my word.
Yeah. You get people, as soon as they land on their phones, hi, I've just landed. As if the guy waiting for them doesn't know. See, this notion of being busy instead of being focused and grounded. Anyway, I could be carried away with that. So without going into any specifics or giving away your IP, what are your plans for the next year, for the next 3 years?
So we have a very broad vision as a business, but I think I can summarize it in 3 key points, effectively. We have the vision over the next 3 years, might be shorter, but our broad target is to try to create 100,000 agents or empower 100,000 unemployed youth. Let's put it that way. Both locally and in sub-Saharan Africa, obviously starting with SADC going up. That's the first part. The second part is over that particular period, we're hoping that we'll be able to transfer at least over 100 million rand in value to those young people in terms of the diversity of tasks they'll be able to achieve in this particular instance. And then I think the third thing in terms of our business is that we want to be able to significantly influence the way in which corporates are thinking about financial services and financial inclusion and development through creating at least 3 products, financial services products, that we believe as a business are fit for purpose for this particular market. Those, I think, can at least give you a picture of what our high-level thinking is at this particular point in time in relation to that.
Interesting. So finally, if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I think what I would do differently is I would assure myself about the fact that life is not lived in a day. Because I think one of the things that we do when we start out in entrepreneurship is we try to do everything. And you forget that life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And my dad always had this saying that he would tell me growing up, that every single time I see something or I'm doing something, it keeps ringing in my head. And he said, son, whatever's hot will eventually become cold, so why hurry? And it's not necessarily to say that you shouldn't be aggressive in terms of your agenda for growth, but if anything, it means that in your process of wanting to chase growth, recognize that it's not necessarily a function of how fast you move, but how intentionally you do it. So I think that's been the big thing that's come out for me over this particular period. So if I were to do it again, I'd be far more intentional and not be pursuing multiple things at the same time in terms of what we're doing internally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Focus. So the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Keep the main thing the main thing. And I think not enough entrepreneurs understand the importance. I think for me, it was a very jarring experience. It was recognizing the importance of your health. Take care of yourself. Take care of your body. You only have one body. And all of these illustrious dreams you're pursuing, you can only achieve in the context of a healthy body. And for me, that was a huge revelation. Not to say that I didn't think my health was important, but people talk about working 24 hours, not sleeping, drinking 35 cups of coffee. It's not the
16 beers.
It's not the wisest thing, and it doesn't have to be done that way. You can still be successful by working hard, but still prioritizing your health. So a lot of the things that we think are zero-sum trades aren't necessarily that. That's, I think, one of the key things for me that I've had to learn.
Prince Nwadeyi, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.
For our listeners out there, if you wish to get in touch with Prince or just have some comment, feel free to pop me an email at Derek, D-E-R-E-K, at DerekPeed, that's P-E-A-D to the end of that, .org, Derek at DerekPeed.org. As you might have guessed, I'm Derek Peed, and this has been Not Just Business.